मेरे पास फ़ोन नहीं है।
यहाँ पे है शेयर का ऑप्शन।
शेयर का ऑप्शन देखे?
हाँ शेयर है ना।
शेयर लेकिन किस व्हाट्सएप पे जाइए, तो टेक्स्ट मैसेज नहीं कर सकते ना। वेयर इज़ योर फ़ोन? टेक अ पिक्चर।
ओके
Can you send it? Because I don't think.
क्यों इतना ऐसा नहीं है?
Because it's not. It's a Wi-Fi phone. Where is the share button? Where is
ये
the
शेयर में आ
link?
गया मैं।
Share में है
Copy है।
copy. अब copy करके क्या करेंगे? Hold on, I have an idea.
Caucasian white.
Let me put this
Arabs,
one.
they call Caucasian white, they describe it as yellow. Asma. Right? Asfar, sorry. And when they say abyad, it's more like very light tan. Right? Extreme, very, very light tan. That's what they describe as abyad.
Like olive skin?
Sorry?
Like olive skin?
No, not like that. Very, very light tan, right? But it's not like that Caucasian type of white skin colors. Like for example, they describe Romans as the yellow army, right? So that was their description of the pale white color. But Rasulullah was a very, very fair color, imbued with redness, as we discussed last time, right? He had a reddish tone hue to his skin. Wasi' al-Jabeen, he had a very broad forehead. So he had a broad forehead. Azaj al-Hawajib, his eyebrows were arched and thin, right? Curved, thin eyebrows. Sawabigha fi ghayri qarani. They were full, right? They weren't patchy, they were full, but however they didn't meet in the middle. Yani he didn't have a unibrow. There was space between his eyebrows. بينهما عرق يدره الغضب, and between his eyebrows there was a vein. Anger would make it pulsate. So when Rasulullah was angry or upset, the Sahaba would be able to tell that he was angry because this vein in his forehead would protrude and would pulsate a little bit. Aqbal al-Yameen, he had a thin, a prominent nose. له نور يعلوه يحسبه من لم يتأمله أشم. So his nose was thin and prominent, and it was a little bit long, and it had a light. There was a light that would come out of his nose, right, on his face, in the center of his face. And he said that if you wouldn't look carefully, if you just glanced, you would think that he has a prominent nose sticking out. However, when you look carefully, his nose wasn't sticking out. It was a light that would come out of his nose that would make it appear as such. كف اللحية, he had a full dense beard. ضليع الفم, he had a wide, large mouth. Again, when we discussed this last week as well, any qualities that we mentioned, it has to be understood to be a description of perfection. Right? Because the Sahaba are trying to describe perfection. That's why they always say, preface it. You have so many narrations that Rasulullah was the most perfect of human beings. There was no one like him ever before, nor will there be anyone like him afterwards. He was perfect. So now when you say Bari al-Fam, it means large in an appropriate manner that would suit his face. Mufallaj al-Asnan, he had a slight gap between his teeth. Again, and from this gap, there was also a light that would come out. Daqiq al-Masruba, his body didn't have a lot of hair. He had one line of hair that would go from his chest until his navel. Right? The rest of his abdomen was hairless. كأن عنقه جيل دمية في صفاء الفضة. It was as if his neck was the neck of a doll in its clarity. And its clarity was like that of silver. So what does that mean? What is he trying to describe here? He's saying that his neck was so perfectly smooth and just perfect that it was as if it's like a statue. You know, you carve a statue and everything's perfect. It's not too fat, it's not too skinny, it's just perfection. So it was as if his neck was the neck of a statue. And in terms of clarity, it was like silver, as if his neck was like silver. That's how clear it was, free of any blemishes, any imperfections. Mu'tadal al-khalq. His entire body was proportionate. Right? None of his limbs seemed too small or too large. He wasn't too skinny or too fat. Everything was proportionate. His eyes were perfectly sized for his face. His nose perfectly. Every single part of Rasulullah was proportionate and perfect. Badin, he was very well built. His arms, his shoulders, his limbs were very well built. متماسك سواء البطن والصدر. His stomach and his chest were even. He was not fat, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? And in some narrations it mentioned that Rasulullah's chest would extend further than his stomach. Right? So again, this would depend on the time of day. If they're in battle, obviously traveling for a long journey, then you tend to lose a little bit of weight. Right? And if you're at home for a while, then you put some weight on. So depending on what time of year it was, what time of day it was, it could vary. But his stomach never extended beyond his chest. He was always had a flat stomach in his life. In fact, Rasulullah greatly disliked people who had big stomachs. Right? He didn't like that quality. Yeah. عريض الصدر, he had a very broad chest. بعيد ما بين المنكبين, and his shoulders were also very broad. Right? So again, that's the description of a strong, well-built individual. Right? Rasulullah was very well built. ضخم الكرادس, his joints were full and thick. أنور المتجرد, the parts of his body that were uncovered would shine. Right? His hands, his face, his neck, his feet, and any part of the body that's not normally, doesn't have clothing on it normally, is uncovered, this would shine. موصول ما بين اللبة والسرة بشعر يجري كالخط. Again, like he's mentioning again that his stomach and his chest were connected with a thin line of hair. عالي الثديين والبطن ما سوى ذلك, and the rest of his chest and stomach didn't have any hair. أشعر الذراعين والمنكبين وأعلى الصدر. However, he did have hair on his arms, his forearms, his upper arms, and his upper chest. طويل الزندين. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had long forearms. His forearms were long. رحب الراح, and the palm, his palm was wide. Again, this shows that he had big limbs, big hands, strong hands. ششن الكفين والقدمين, and his hands and his feet were fully fleshed. And they weren't thin, they weren't weak looking. سائل الأطراف, and his limbs were long. All of his limbs were relatively long. أو قال شائل الأطراف. Or it means شائل الأطراف, which means that his fingers and his toes were well proportioned. Right? They weren't too long, too short. خمصان الأخمصين, the soles of his feet were arched. مسيح القدمين ينبو عنهما الماء, his feet were very smooth, such that if you poured water over it, it would just flow smoothly. إذا زال قرعا, if he were to walk, he would lift his feet completely, he would not drag his feet. يخطو تكفيا ويمشي هونا, he would walk fast, but he would walk lightly. He wasn't a heavy-footed person. It was a walk of humility. Yet he would walk very fast. As we mentioned last week as well, the Sahaba say that when Rasulullah would walk, it would be difficult to keep up with him. And it was as if the earth was being, folded up for him. Like he's walking one step, but it's as if we have to walk 3 steps to cover that distance. And he was very quick and fast-paced walking. Right? Again, this is a sign of a person who is busy, who has a purpose in life. He's going to whenever he's walking for a reason. He has things to do. He's not a lazy person who has nothing to do, just sitting around. He was a very agile, strong, motivated individual. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ذريع المشية, he walked very fast. إذا مشى كأنما ينحط من صبب. When he walked, it was as if he was descending from a high hill. وإذا التفت جميعا, when he would turn to face you completely. خافض الطرف, he would lower his gaze, he would keep his gaze lowered. نظره إلى الأرض أطول من نظره إلى السماء. His gaze towards the earth would be longer than his gaze towards the sky. And out of his humility, out of his shyness, bashfulness, Rasulullah would always keep his gaze lowered. جل نظره الملاحظة. Most of the time when he would look from the corner of his eye, يعني glance. He wouldn't stare at things. Right? When he would look at things, he would just glance, look for a few seconds, and then look away. He had a habit of not staring at anything. يسوق أصحابه ويبدر من يسوق أصحابه. He would make his companions walk around him. Yani he didn't have this arrogance that I am the leader, everyone else has to walk behind me. Rather, he would walk amongst his companions as if he was one of them. ويبدر من لقي بالسلام, and he would initiate salam with whoever he met. Right? It was seldom that someone would be able to say salam to Rasulullah because he would often say salam first to them. Right? Whoever, even children, you have to imagine this is the leader of the entire Arabian Peninsula towards the end of his life. The leader of the entire Arabian Peninsula. And he was walking with an entourage. He's a leader, he's a judge, he's a prophet of Allah. And he would see children playing in the streets of Medina and he would go and say salam to them as well. Right? Not an ounce of arrogance in the character of Rasulullah. And Rasulullah, as we mentioned last week, he had a seal in the back, in between his shoulders. Right? The seal of prophethood. Now the Sahaba described the seal of Rasulullah as well. One Sahabi says that it was like do you guys know what a bed canopy is? Or for example, you know couches, they have those buttons all around sometimes as a design. So the one of the Sahaba says it was like the size of one of those buttons on a bed canopy. Right? Maybe about the size of a quarter. And it was a reddish piece of flesh that was slightly raised and rounded, right, in between his two shoulders. And the seal of prophethood, it had some hairs on it as well. Right? So we find different descriptions of Sahaba that some say it was the size of, it was like, for example, it was like the egg of a small bird. One Sahabi says it was like a closed fist. It was a little bit raised and rounded. One Sahabi says, I felt the back of Rasulullah, I was rubbing the back of Rasulullah, and I felt the seal of prophethood. So then when his students ask him, what was the seal of prophethood? What did it look like? He says it was a cluster of hairs. So we have different descriptions, but when we put all the descriptions together, you come up with the understanding that it was a raised flesh in reddish color that had some hairs on it that was in between his two shoulders, on his back, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this marked the seal of prophethood, and Ali says this was the seal of prophethood, وَكَانَ خَاتَمَ النَّبِيِّينَ, and he himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was the seal of the prophets. He was the final messenger to be revealed. And this was a sign that the Anbiya, Isa alayhi salam specifically, described about Rasulullah. He told his followers that I'm giving you glad tidings of a prophet who will come. His name is Ahmad. He gave him certain descriptions. One that he accepts gifts, but he doesn't accept charity. Different descriptions he gave, and one of the descriptions was that he has a seal of prophethood. And when Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu was seeking out Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came, he heard about a prophet that's appeared in Mecca, so he traveled. By that time Rasulullah was in Medina actually, so he traveled to Medina and he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so he tested him with these signs. And the last sign that he wanted to see was the seal of prophethood. Right? And so he would follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam around his back until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam realized what was happening, so he lowered his shirt. And he stood so he can see the seal of prophethood. And when he saw that, he immediately accepted Islam because this was the last sign that Isa had already told his followers. And Salman al-Farisi, as his name suggests, was Persian, right? He was born and raised as a fire worshipper. That didn't make sense to him, so he sought out monks, Christian monks. Then they told him about Rasulullah and then he finally found Rasulullah and accepted Islam. So this was the seal of prophethood of Rasulullah. Now coming to his hair, Rasulullah's hair, like we mentioned, was wavy and it was very thick and full. He had black hair for his entire life, except near the end of his life, what did he say? He had about 20, between 13 to 20 gray hairs that Rasulullah had near the middle of his hair. And the Sahaba say that when Rasulullah would apply oil his hair, you couldn't even see them. Right? Because the oil, you can see them at all. But when he didn't apply oil, you could see, count maybe 14 to 20 hairs. And these white hairs, they came to Rasulullah relatively suddenly. And when the Sahaba asked him, he said, "Shayabatni Hud wa akhawatuha." The surahs of Hud and its sisters have made me old. And in another narration, he actually lists them out. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنه قال أبو بكر يا رسول الله قد شيت قال شيبتني هود والواقعة والمرسلات وعم يتساءلون وإذا الشمس كورت. That Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه said, Ya Rasulullah, you're getting old. Right? Because again, Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه and Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم had a relation, they were friends from before prophethood. They had a very, very close relationship. In fact, we don't have too many descriptions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in detail like this that we read. Why? Because the Sahabas would say that we would have this internal conflict within us. We'd want to stare at the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu says that there's nothing more beloved for me, nothing more enjoyable to me than just sitting and staring at the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Generally, you don't stare at the face of another man like that. But such was the beauty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that it would put you in a trance. Right? So you say, I would love to just sit and stare at the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, suddenly I would feel this awe and I would have to look away. And I could never look to my heart's content. This is why I cannot describe Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to you despite having known him for years. Right? And so in the gathering of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, most of the Sahaba would be looking down. Right? They would look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as soon as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's gaze turned toward them, they would look down. Except for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would look toward Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he would smile, and Abu Bakr would smile back, and just continue to look at Rasulullah. But they had a very unique relationship, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So Abu Bakr says, Ya Rasulullah, you're getting old, and you have white hairs. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that Surah Hud, Surah Waqi'ah, Surah Mursalat, Surah Amma Yatasa'alun, and Surah Idha Shamsu Kuwirat, these surahs have made me old. And they're so severe, they talk about the Day of Judgment. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge His ummah and decide who will go to Jannah, who will go to Jahannam, they describe the horrors and the terrors of the Day of Judgment, and this entire world will be destroyed. So this caused great grief and concern in the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that what will happen to that ummah. And the stress and concern and worry that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced when these surahs were revealed, they made some of his hairs grow. Right? But he had 15 to 20 white hairs. And as we mentioned, his hair was long and full, thick, jet black, dark black hair. And it was not curly, it wasn't straight, it was wavy. And he would grow it out until it reached near his shoulders, and he would trim it back up to his earlobes. And then it would grow back out to his shoulders. Unless he went to Hajj or Umrah, then he would shave it, and then his hair would grow out. As for the garments of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved qamis. That was his favorite garment, wearing qamis. At different times in his life, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was gifted different garments. His normal clothing that he wore, his shirt was was made of a very, very coarse material, and it was patched. That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would stitch himself. Whenever it got it tore, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would come home and stitch it himself, put a patch on it. At different times in his life, he also was gifted clothing that he would wear. One specific clothing that many of the Sahaba describe and say that this one day I saw Rasulullah in this red garment, this red overcoat. And when we say red, it wasn't pure red, it was red and had black stripes. It was thin black stripes, and then thick red stripes. So many of the Sahaba say, Aisha radiallahu anha, his wife says that I can never forget the image of seeing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that red coat. There was nothing more beautiful than seeing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that red coat. Right? 3 or 4 Sahaba describe this cloak that Rasulullah had, which was red and black stripes. He had another very fancy Yemeni mantle that he was gifted. It was like a mantle, like a big overcoat they put on over your normal clothing. Then whenever caravans or tribes or important people would come to visit Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he would wear that to go out and meet them, right? As the governor, as a leader. He had another overcoat that he was gifted, which was a Roman overcoat that he wore on a journey one time, and the sleeves were relatively narrow on that. So a report comes that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tried to roll up his sleeves to do wudu, but the sleeves were so tight that he couldn't get it over his elbows. It got stuck here on his forearms. So he sallallahu alaihi wasallam pulled his overcoat out, his arms out from underneath it, as if you're taking it off, And then he flung it back across his neck to make wudu, and then put it back on. So he had that as well. And as for his izar, Rasulullah normally what we call lungi nowadays, that's what he would wear, which is a stitched cloth that you wrap around here, lower, he wears a lower garment. That was often what Rasulullah had. However, there are mentions and reports that he had a sirwal as well, which is pants. But often, again, like we said, the majority of the time, most of the time, he'd wear a shirt which extended down to about half of his shins. It was a long shirt that he wore. So this is with regards to the clothing of Rasulullah. Now, when it comes to the sandals, we can read the narration, but it doesn't really make sense if you talk about it because sandals aren't made like that. It had 2 toe straps that would come around and connect in the middle again. If you just search up the Rasulullah sandal, that's the pictures that come up. That's basically what the narration describe. Right? So you can search that up yourself, inshallah. Now, when it comes to the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? I forgot to mention one thing about his hair. Often he would leave his hair open, right? He would comb it, and he wouldn't part it. If it parted, he would let it part. If it didn't, he would leave it unparted. When he went to battle, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would actually braid his hair in 4 braids when he went for battle, right? So it says in 4 braids, so perhaps it was like, cornrows are kind of, it was perhaps like that. When he went to battle, he would braid his hair like that and then tie a turban around it, right? That's how his hair was when he conquered Mecca. When he entered Mecca as a conqueror, his hair was braided in 4 braids like that. But on a normal braid basis, he wouldn't do anything to his hair, he would leave it open. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved applying oil. He would apply a lot of oil. So much oil that he would have to put a cloth underneath his topi. He would keep a cloth, and that cloth would just become like full of oil. It would become soaked and drenched in oil. That's how much oil Rasulullah meant to apply on his hair. As for kuhl, many brothers apply kuhl, walk around with kuhl. Rasulullah did apply kuhl on a daily basis. However, he would apply it at night before he went to sleep. Right? He wouldn't wear it around in the daytime. Kuhl is good for your eyes, it's good for your eyelashes, it has a lot of health benefits. But Rasulullah wouldn't wear that in the daytime, right? It's not sunnah to walk around in the day with kuhl on your eyes. He would wear that to sleep, and in the morning, when he washed his face and wudu, it would come off and he would stay like that. However, Rasulullah's eyes were such that it was as if he had kuhl on his eyes, even though he was wearing kuhl all the time, right? It had this appearance. Now, in terms of the character of Rasulullah, he lived a very, very, very simple lifestyle. Even near the end of his life, when a lot of money started coming into Medina, he could have lived lavishly. He chose to live a very, very simple lifestyle. Right? One narration when Rasulullah was upset with his wives, and he told them that for 1 month I'm not going to speak to any of you. And he went to a room that he had, that was separate. It was on the 2nd story. So he saw someone just stay there. He would come down for salah, leave the salah, and he would go back to his room, and he wouldn't come out. And Umar got extremely worried because one of his wives was who? Hafsa. Was a daughter of Umar radiallahu anhu. Right? So we'll get to this a little bit later, but basically what happened was that in the story of Umar, that was a very long story. Actually, we'll mention that later when we come to that topic. So, but at this portion of the story, Umar radiallahu anhu asked permission to see Rasulullah multiple times. Finally, he's given permission, so he comes inside, and Rasulullah was laying down, and he gets up. And he was just wearing a shawl, so you can see his stomach and his side. So when he gets up, Umar radiallahu anhu saw the side of Rasulullah had prints of date leaves. Because the straw mat was made of date palms, leaves, right? It was thick, coarse. And the entire side of Rasulullah was imprinted. And it was so uncomfortable. And Umar began to cry. He said, Ya Rasulullah, you have the kings of Rome and Persia, and they live such lavish lifestyles. And here you are, you're the Nabi of Allah. Not only are you the king of Saudi Arabia, basically not Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, but you're also the Rasul of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You deserve that lifestyle a lot more than these kings do. So Rasulullah got upset. He said, Oh Umar, is this what we're here for? Is this what we're here for, to get luxury in this life? And that's all he said. He got upset. So Umar going to change the topic and start joking with Rasulullah. Right? And this was the lifestyle that he led. One time, Umar says that I didn't have any food in my house. I got extremely hungry. And I was so hungry, so bothered by my hunger that I couldn't sit at home, so I just went outside. In the middle of the day. Again, in the desert, midday, everyone goes inside. Everyone, you can't be outside, it's too hot. So it's abnormal to be out and about that time of the day. But he said that I was so hungry, I didn't know what to do, I just went outside and started walking outside. And I ran into Rasulullah. So I said, Ya Rasulullah, what are you doing at this time of the day? So he said that I'm hungry, I couldn't sit inside the house, so I just came out. So Umar said, oh, I'm hungry as well, that's why I'm here as well. So they sit down and they begin talking. And then they see Abu Bakr walking. And then they ask him, oh Abu Bakr, what are you doing at this time? He says, my hunger was so intense that I couldn't sit at home, I just came outside. So then all three of them sit and start talking. Now these are the three greatest men of Medina, the three leaders. The leader of the entire Arabian Peninsula and his two main grand viziers. And this is the condition that they're so hungry that they're not able to sit. And then Abu Haytham radiallahu anhu is walking that time. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, what are you doing here? Umar says, we were hungry, so we didn't know what to do, so we just came out here. So he says, oh, come to my house, I'll feed you. So he runs home, he tells his wife they have one goat, one old goat, that's all they have. He says, slaughter that goat, we have some wheat, make some dough, and make some bread. I'll go slaughter that goat, let's feed Rasulullah and his companions. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, and Rasulullah eat this bread with meat. And after they eat that, then Rasulullah looks at Abu Bakr and Umar and he says, oh Umar, Abu Bakr, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. Even this morsel that you're eating, you'll be asked about on the day of judgment. You have to answer to Allah that you were given this blessing. What did you do with it? And Umar begins to cry. He says, even this, after enduring so much hunger, we get one morsel of food, we'll be asked about this. He says, even this, you'll be asked about it. Right? This is a lesson for us. We have to be aware, how many times do we eat in a day? Right? Not even 3 meals, because we have 3 meals and we snack along every time you're walking by the fridge, you open the fridge, see what's inside, grab a little bite to eat. You open the pantry, grab a snack. How many times do we eat throughout the day? Right? But you don't even think that this is ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this. Right? But this was the life of Rasulullah. Aisha radiallahu anha is telling her nephew Urwa that 2 months would go by and he wouldn't light a fire in the house. The stove wouldn't be turned on because there would be nothing to cook for 2 months in a row. And Urwa is shocked. He says, how did you guys survive? And she says, we just had aswadain, dates and water. Right? Dates and water. For 2 months in a row, at a time. Abdul Rahman bin Auf radiallahu anhu. Later on in his life, he becomes one of the richest Sahaba. Right? When he left his estate, when he passed away, when it was being divided, it would perhaps be in the billions of today. That's how much money he had by the end of his life. Right? That they were cutting. He had tiles of gold that they were cutting to distribute it, and many times the saws would break because of how much gold they had to cut. Right? So this was Abu Rahman bin Auf. Near the end of his life, he said he was sitting down, and a dish of meat and bread was brought to him, and he began to cry profusely. So his companions asked him, "Why are you crying?" He said, until the day Rasulullah died, he never ate wheat, bread, and meat to his fill. Once in his life. Never ate meat and bread to his fill, once in his life. And I'm afraid that all of our blessings are being given to us in this dunya for all the hardship that we endured in those early years, and we won't have anything left. While Rasulullah and my companions have passed away and they're getting their reward in Jannah. I'm afraid that I won't have anything left when I get to the Akhirah. Allah is giving me everything here. Abu Hurairah, he was wiping his nose with an expensive handkerchief, and he began to cry. The Sahaba, his companion asked him, again, this is much after the passing of Rasulullah. His companion asked him, why are you crying? He said, there was a time when I would be so hungry that I would be in the mimbar and I would have seizures out of hunger. And at that time, the treatment for seizures, it was that they would apply pressure to the neck. They'd step on the neck, apply pressure to stop the seizure. And he said that people would start stepping on my neck, but wallahi, there was nothing wrong with me except that I was so hungry that I would go into seizures. And now I'm sitting here wiping my nose with expensive handkerchiefs. Right? So Rasulullah's lifestyle was extremely, extremely simple. Right? Initially, they endured a lot of hardship, a lot of unimaginable levels of hardship in order to bring Islam. And because of their hardship, we're able to sit here and proclaim La ilaha illallah. Now, when it came to the humility of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Battle of Badr, right, there were about 75 camels and over 300 people, 314 people. So there were about 3 people per camel. They had to share. So they had to take turns riding. So Rasulullah sallallahu also had a camel to share with Ali radiallahu anhu and Abu Lubaba radiallahu anhu. So now Abu Lubaba and Ali radiallahu anhu, they say, let's just let Rasulullah ride. We can just walk. How are you going to make Rasulullah take turns while we're riding and Rasulullah is walking with the camel? This can't happen. So they say, Ya Rasulullah, look, we're young men. We're okay. Why don't you ride the camel and we'll just walk, inshallah. We're young. Rasulullah is in his 50s. So Rasulullah says, look, neither are you too stronger than me, nor am I less in need of reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than you. So we'll take turns. So here is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam who's walking while his young companions, his son-in-law and another young companion are riding on a camel, leading the camel that they're riding. Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Anas radiallahu anhu says that I served Rasulullah sallallahu for 10 years. 10 years I served him. And not once did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam say even oof to me. Right? Oof. Oof is not even an expression of anger, it's an expression of irritation. You get someone does something that really bothers you and you say, like that. Not even like that. Right? So humble that any young girl in Medina could grab Rasulullah's hand and take Rasulullah to help her with anything. Right? Again, why is that so important? Because this is a leader, right? This is a king. When you have a king, a leader, can you go to Joe Biden and grab his hand? Hey, can you help me grab that? No, you can't. Right? Even if you're an important person, you can't do that. Even if you're a vizier, someone in a high-ranking official, you still can't do that. But here, they're saying that a young girl, any random kid on the street of Medina could grab Rasulullah's hand and drag him and to do whatever they need him to do. Right? And this was the humility of Rasulullah. The Arabis would come. And one time an Arabi came and grabbed the collar of Rasulullah and said, Ya Muhammad, and asking him to give him money. And then Rasulullah just calmly responded to him and gave him whatever he needed. And so Rasulullah was humble, soft-spoken, kind. Now, as for the bravery of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ali radiallahu anhu says that in the Battle of Badr, whenever the battle would get so intense and we needed refuge, we would go and seek refuge around Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And who's saying this? Ali radiallahu anhu. Who's Ali radiallahu anhu? He is one of the bravest people, the one who killed the most people in the Battle of Badr. The top soldier is saying that whenever the battle got too intense and we needed some refuge, we needed to step back a little bit, we'd go and stand by Rasulullah because Rasulullah was so brave. One time in Medina, in the middle of the night, there was a strange loud sound. And everyone got worried, perhaps there's an enemy coming, surprise attack. Maybe it's a beast that's going to come attack. They don't know what's happening. So the Sahaba come out and they wait for little groups to form so they can go as a group in the middle of the night to go see. Again, it's not like you have street lights, you don't have GPS, you don't have anything, right? So you go out, if there's a beast, then you have to fight that beast by yourself. If there's an army, you're going to get stuck there. So they're waiting for a little group to get together so they can go see what's happening. And by the time they go out, they see Rasulullah coming back, riding bareback on the horse of Talha radiallahu anhu with his sword hanging on his neck. And he said, it's okay, don't worry, it's okay, it's fine, I checked it all already. Right? So brave, they heard the sound, he got up, the swords had a belt, right? But obviously he wasn't dressed, he was sleeping. right? So it's not like he has a proper, you have time to put your belt on and everything. He hung the sword around his neck and he jumped onto Talha on his horse, bareback, without a saddle, and just galloped off into the darkness to see what's happening by himself. And by the time Sahaba get a group together, he's already checked it out, everything's done, safe. Right? So this was brave. In every aspect, Rasulullah was the height of perfection. And we'll end off with this one narration. Hussein radiallahu anhu says that I asked my father about the conduct of Rasulullah towards people in his gathering. So he said the Prophet was always cheerful. He always had a smiling face, cheerful countenance. He had an easygoing character, and he had a soft and lenient disposition. He was neither harsh, nor was he rough and boisterous, loud. Nor was he lewd and vulgar in his behavior. Nor would he ever find faults in people. Whenever he would dislike something that he saw in a gathering, he would overlook it. And he would not, and whoever did something wrong in his gathering, he would not make them feel bad about it. He wouldn't call people out. And if people were engaged in something that he didn't like, he would simply just refrain and stay away from it. He made 3 things haram upon himself. Disputation, arguing, being excessive in anything, and ma la yani, things that didn't concern him. He would never engage himself in that. And he forsook three things with regards to people. So that was with regards to himself. He wouldn't argue with people, he wouldn't delve into matters that didn't concern him, and he would never do too much of anything. And with regards to people, he didn't do 3 things. He would never disgrace anyone, he would never find fault with anyone, nor would he pry into the private affairs of anyone. He would not speak except regarding things for which he hoped in reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when he would speak, those sitting in his company would lower their heads and be so still as if birds were perched upon their heads. Only after would he stop talking would they speak. He ﷺ would not dispute with anyone when they would converse in his presence. They would listen attentively to anyone who spoke in his presence until that person was finished. There was no interruption going on in the gathering of Rasulullah. The first of them to speak to the Prophet ﷺ would be the first of them to enter. Yani, he would first come, first serve. Whoever came first, they had a matter to discuss with Rasulullah ﷺ. He would finish that matter with them before moving on to anyone else. He ﷺ would laugh at whatever they laughed at, and would express amazement at whatever they expressed amazement at. He ﷺ would be patient with people who spoke crudely and with the requests of strangers. And so it was that his companions would usher them to the Prophet ﷺ. What does this mean? This means that Rasulullah ﷺ would sit amongst his companions as if he was one of them. So much so that if a stranger came, they wouldn't even be able to tell who's the leader of this people. And this became a problem because people would come and they wouldn't be able to find Rasulullah ﷺ until the Sahaba asked if they could build a little pulpit for Rasulullah ﷺ to sit on. That way it would be identified. He would be identifiable as the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And he would say, if you see a person seeking the fulfillment of a need, then help him. He would not accept praise except from the one responding to a favor given. Yani, he wouldn't like when people praised him. The only time he would allow it is if he did a favor upon him and they were praising Rasulullah in order to thank him. Because when you do a favor on someone and then you don't even let them thank you, then they feel bad, right? That, oh, this person did a favor upon me, you didn't let me thank them. That's the least I can do. So in that moment, he would permit the praise of people. He would not interrupt a person while he was speaking unless the person went too far, said something they should have. In which case, he would stop him either by prohibiting that person or by getting up and leaving. And this was the gathering of Rasulullah, one of harmony and perfection. And we'll end off with this, inshallah. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to adopt the way of life that Rasulullah had, the character of Rasulullah as a part of our lifestyle. If you have any questions, you can ask, inshallah. No questions? Yes.
the seal of prophethood, right? Was it only for Nabi or was it for also other prophets?
No, that was specifically was given to Rasulullah only. Because he was that was a mark of Rasulullah being the final messenger.
He asked him what kind of oil he used it now?
Olive oil.
No, olive.
Olive oil.
Can you repeat the question to sister?
Yeah. So the brother asked what type of oil he used. So Rasulullah, I mean, we don't have any reports clearly mentioning that he used this oil, but we have many reports saying that Rasulullah encouraged the use of olive oil. So we can assume that he applied olive oil in his hair as well. Anything else?
What about helping his wife with washing the dishes?
Yeah, that's something I wanted to mention. I forgot about that, which is an important part of life, which is the Rasulullah's lifestyle with his family, with his wives. Right? Rasulullah said that خيركم خيركم لنسائكم وأنا خيركم لأهلكم وأنا خيركم لأهلي. That the best of you are those who are the best to their families, and I am the best to my family. Right? And Rasulullah, one thing that Rasulullah didn't engage in too much was wasting of time, right? He didn't waste his time. The one time that Rasulullah would engage in so-called waste of time, useless things, was when he was with his wife. Right? As a means of having light-hearted discussions, conversations, enjoyment. Right? For example, we have one time Aisha radiallahu anha, she was boasting about the wealth of her father in the days of Jahiliyyah. Oh, my father was so rich back in the day. So Rasulullah didn't like that. And he said, Aisha, don't do that. Right? Then he told her a long story. It's a very long hadith that comes. It's about 11 women who get together and they promise each other that we're going to speak about our husbands and we won't hold anything back. Right? So 11 women. It's a very long hadith. It comes in Bukhari, it comes in Shama'il as well. And the only purpose of mentioning, again, the only purpose of mentioning the hadith is just to show how Rasulullah engaged in this pastime with his wives. So it goes on, he mentions this really long story to Aisha radiallahu anha. Right? So some of the wives, they say, describe how their husband is a horrible individual, right? Just make fun of their husband. Some of them praise their husband. And in the end, there's one woman who says that I had such an amazing husband, his name was Abu Zura, and he was so good to me, and she goes on and on and on talking about Abu Zura. Until, however, one day Abu Zura, again, this is a story that happened in Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic days. It's just the folklore that was around. So someone was just narrating folklore to his wife. Right? So he says that until one day this man, Abu Zura, he went out, he was impressed by another lady, so he divorced Zura, and he married this other woman. Right? So Rasulullah says, "Oh Aisha, I am as good to you as Abu Zura was to Zura. Except, I'm not going to divorce you. Right? I will not divorce you." So Aisha she begins to laugh and she says, لك أبي وأمي يا رسول الله أنت أحسن لي من أبي زرع لأم زرع. May my parents be sacrificed for you, Ya Rasulullah. You're better to me than Abu Zura was to Zura. Right? And they would have this, light-hearted moments. Another time, Aisha says that this group of Habashi men, they came and they were putting on a show, like with their spears, right? Performing an acrobatic act that was taking place in the courtyard of the masjid. Again, not in the masjid, outside, courtyard of the masjid. So Aisha's house was connected to the masjid, and she wanted to see. So Rasulullah stood in the doorway to cover her, and she stood behind him, and she put her head on the shoulder of Rasulullah, standing behind him. So as to serve as, parda basically, to veil her from the outside. So she stood behind Rasulullah and she said that he stood there until I was content. Right? She said that I was a young girl, and you can imagine how long a young girl would stand and watch. Right? I stood there for a really very long time. I kept watching, and Rasulullah just stood there until I was done satisfied and I didn't want to watch anymore. Right? So he would engage in this lighthearted moments. Again, and then sometimes when Rasulullah and Aisha would be taking ghusl before Fajr, Rasulullah would just hurriedly start taking all the water and using it up. And Aisha would be like, "Ya Rasulullah, no, don't use up all the water. Save some for me." And start competing for the water. Or sometimes Rasulullah, when they were eating, Rasulullah would reach over and grab the morsel that Aisha had and he would look and see where she put her mouth, and he would bite from that portion. Or if she drank from a morsel, he would pick up the glass, find where she put her mouth, and drink from that part of the glass. Right? So this is very, very important aspect of life. That this, unfortunately, this is because you can put on good character, you can pretend to be a great person all you want at work, when you come to the masjid, and everyone's like, mashallah, this person has great character. But true great character is at home, right? Because no one can keep their guard up forever. At home is when your true self comes out. And if in that moment you're a man of excellent character, then that's the hallmark of a great individual, right? So Rasulullah was very, very kind to his wives, the children in his home. He was very, very kind to them. Usama bin Zayd, one time he was running. Again, who's Usama bin Zayd? Who remembers?
Son of Zayd bin Haritha.
Zayd bin Haritha. We're at it right now.
Questions for the
Okay. So the son of Zayd bin Haritha. Who's Zayd bin Haritha?
He adopted son of
He's adopted.
Adopted son of Rasulullah. So Usama is basically like a grandson to Rasulullah. So Usama was running and he tripped and fell. He started bleeding from his face. And Rasulullah told his wife, he got so worried, he said, go look at Usama, what happened? And she went and she saw blood on his face and she just freaked out for a moment. So Rasulullah ran, picked up Usama, cleaned the blood off his face, consoled him. He would ride, when he'd go home, he would play horsey with his grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. And he would go on his hands and knees and start crawling around while they sat on his back. And one time Rasulullah was giving khutbah on the pulpit, and he sees Hassan enter the masjid, and he's trying to get to his grandfather in the back of the masjid. And he's stumbling over the people, and he falls down. And Rasulullah couldn't help himself. He immediately descended and ran over to his grandson, picked him up, and brought him onto the pulpit. And he said that, children are a test for us. Right? And so he was very, very kind and compassionate when dealing with his family. Now, people get it wrong, right? It's not like Rasulullah was never harsh. There were moments where Rasulullah was strict and harsh as well. But everything is in its place. For example, Rasulullah's harshness was towards his close students. Why? Because he was training them. He needed them to be men of character, men who could carry on his mission. And when it came to Umar radiallahu anhu, when it came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when it came to Ali, Uthman, all these close, big-time Sahaba, when they would make mistakes, Rasulullah would reprimand them. Right? Umar radiallahu anhu, one time he said something that Rasulullah didn't like, so Rasulullah hit him in his chest hard. Umar, what are you doing? Right? So he would be harsh as well when time needed with specific people. His kindness was for people who didn't know him so well. Why? Because when you know someone really well, then you can be a little bit strict with them. Especially when you're training them, they're your students, close students. But when it comes to the general public, they don't have that understanding. So you have to be very kind. You have to be very understanding. You have to overlook a lot. So there was this balance that Rasulullah has. But when it came to his wives and children, he was very nice. Always. Never yelled at people, never raised his voice. Very calm. Even when you get upset, Rasulullah would never become violent or losing his temper, losing his control. That would never happen.
There was something about a picture hanging in the
Yeah.
Then he said you could make the pillowcase.
Yeah, basically, one time Aisha had a curtain that had some pictures. So if someone came to the house, he didn't like that, he didn't enter. So she got very worried. She also happened. He said that when you have any home that has dogs or pictures in the home, angels don't come in that home. So I will not enter as well. So she took that down and she made a cushion to sit on with that. So that also was allowed. So it's not like he wouldn't, obviously you